I'm Vinnie Politan, and we are live from downtown Dedham, Massachusetts. There's a shot of the courthouse where the retrial of the century is taking place, and that is the subject of our investigation tonight. The death of John O'Keefe and the retrial of his accused murderer, Karen Read. This is a story that has taken on a life of its own in terms of the reaction to all of this. But at the heart of this, it goes back to what happened to John O'Keefe and what is taking place inside the courtroom. Here's the story. At the center of Karen Read's high-profile murder trial is the mysterious death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe, found in the snow outside 34 Fairview Road on January 29, 2022. While prosecutors claim Read struck him with her SUV, leaving him to die, the defense presents a sharply different version of events, one that hinges on critical injuries found on O'Keefe's body, particularly his right arm. A laceration and distinctive pattern wounds on O'Keefe's arm have become a focal point of expert testimony. The defense argues these injuries are not consistent with a car strike, but instead suggest an animal attack, specifically from a dog. They point to the presence of a German Shepherd inside the house that night and claim O'Keefe was assaulted inside before being moved outside. This injury, seemingly minor compared to his fatal wounds, may hold the key to unraveling whether his death was a tragic accident or something far more sinister. And the jury deliberated for 9 hours total now, all day today and beginning, of course, last week on Friday. And when you think about the deliberations, everyone's going, what are they talking about? What are they going through? Well, I think one of the things that they absolutely have to be talking about is John O'Keefe's arm. And it begins with the picture of his arm that we have seen so many times, became such a big part of this case. And when you take a look at the picture of his arm and you look at the wounds on the arm, you think, how did they get there, right? There's your first impression just looking at it. But this jury also had testimony about the arm. So that is another thing that they have to take into consideration, their own life experiences, their own gut feelings about what they're seeing, but then also what they heard from some of the evidence in the courtroom. They also heard from accident reconstructionists who also talked about John O'Keefe's arm. Take a listen.
There's been two potential theories that I've seen on that issue. One is a glass was thrown at the rear of the vehicle and shattered it. The second one was an impact to the arm. If the impact is basically more than approximately 8 miles an hour, it will likely break the taillight lens.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty whether John O'Keefe's injuries on his arm, inevitably in the back of his head, are consistent with being struck by a Lexus identical to the defendant's Lexus on January 29, 2022?
Yes.
What's your opinion?
That it is.
Did you determine, based on the testing by aperture, whether or not it was consistent, that paint transfer test was consistent with Mr. O'Keefe's arm being damaged by the taillight at speed?
I did.
Okay, and what is that conclusion?
That does not represent that at all. The evidence from that test, again, it's only puts pain on the arm. So in no way does that determine or demonstrate how, if the arm struck the taillight cover, how the taillight cover could shatter, how the movement of the arm could interact with the cover to produce those abrasions.
Did you go, I'm sorry.
There's just no evidence of that. There's no steps taken to demonstrate how, if that's even possible.
And that brings us to the first question in our investigation. What do John O'Keefe's arm injuries show? Right? The picture of his arm, the expert testimony about the injuries that were found on his arm, and the lack of injuries that were detected on his arm. We're going to need some help. We've got a lot of help tonight. Here to help us answer this question live here in Dedham, Massachusetts, criminal defense attorney Joseph Krause Jr. and criminal defense attorney Peter Ellikin. We're also joined by John DePietro, host and creator of Road Patrol Live. He's been in the courtroom throughout the trial. And criminal defense attorney Sidney Rushing. Great to have you all here. Let's start first, Joe, and let's talk about the significance of John O'Keefe's arm for this jury. Like, how important of a piece of the puzzle is it for this jury to figure out what happened here?
Well, it's critically important, but it's just one piece of the puzzle, and I'm glad you said that. If you remember...
He's finally happy with something I've said. It took a while.
It took us a long time to get here, but the show just started.
Right.
Look, if you think about it, all of the injuries on John O'Keefe were on his right side. The bruise was on his right knee. The cut was over his right eye. There was a bruise on his right hand. These superficial abrasions, not puncture wounds, according to the ME, were all on the right side in close proximity to taillight fragment that was found in his garments. Now, if you consider that in the context of the data that shows that he only moved for 20 seconds, that whole dog bite theory was predicated on John O'Keefe going in the house. Once that was washed out of this trial and once it was not contested, the whole fantastical theory about a dog bite left with it. Remember the first trial, 9 to 12 guilty on count 2, the manslaughter. So it was rejected once, it's rejected twice. And you heard Archer, but interestingly enough, on Exhibit E, Archer showed how it can happen. And you consider that in combination with Welcher, where he shows that the geometry works, the physics work. The only plausible, realistic explanation for those injuries to the arm was from the woman with the broken taillight.
Peter?
There is more reasonable doubt here than you can drive a truck through here. I mean, if the main argument that they have is that he was basically struck on the arm and that made him fly 10 feet through the air and then die and all that, and the experts here, the independent experts from ARCA, said that, at 24 miles an hour, as the prosecution says, your arm or your hand would have to be, if not fractured and broken, you'd have to see some evidence of bruising.
So you think the lack of injuries is significant?
Major, and then of course you have all the experts saying that it just doesn't line up at all with being hit with the tail light, that the way that a dog's mouth or tooth or the way they would scratch, there's 36 points of entry. There would never be 36 points of entry from that tail light. It is just the prosecution thing side just doesn't really hold, as far as there's just way too much reasonable doubt. It strains credibility.
It would have to be a dog with only a top jaw, without a bottom jaw. And remember, the so-called expert, Dr. Russell, saw absolutely no puncture wounds. Again, the case doesn't rise and fall with just those wounds.
Right.
It's one piece of the puzzle when you consider it with the data and the fact that John O'Keefe only moved for 20 seconds. And a brilliant point in the closing from the Commonwealth. Had a dog grabbed hold of that arm and been shaking him around, the temperature of the phone would have been affected, and it would have recorded additional health data movement, which it did not do.
There couldn't be that many
issues
points
resolved.
There couldn't be that many points of entry, and also there was expert after expert after expert after expert saying it was not consistent with being hit by a car. And a dog's mouth does move around. It's not a simple bite. It's between the scratching and what he does, moving his mouth around, it is very consistent. And the fact that it's simply abrasions at 24 miles an hour, that would be a lot more if a car hit it.
Let's go to Sidney. Sidney, what are your thoughts?
I agree that I think that, what we have here is just injuries not lining up to me. My mom's also a medical doctor. She's a great one. And when I sent her this, the photo of this and asked for her opinion, she said, that's not from a motor vehicle. And I think there's a lot of doctors around the country that agree with that. Again, and common sense tells me I don't need an expert to tell me if a car is going 24 miles an hour in reverse, a 6,000-pound car at that, I'm expecting bruising, broken bones, fractures, things like that. And on top of that, Welcher himself said all that would have to happen is the car would have to move 8 miles an hour backwards, and that's what enough force would be to cause a fracture in the hand or a broken bone. And he's saying that they were going 24 miles an hour. So I don't think it lines up.
John DePietro, jump in.
Vinnie, I thought it was very telling when Hank Brennan used the ARCA video in his closing argument that showed the mannequin and the vehicle going backwards, and then we saw there it is. That's how the taillight could shatter on the arm. And also right now, as this jury's deliberating, I'm telling you, of all the things that they may remember, one thing they remember was that blue paint demonstration. That was one of those things that broke through. I think they demonstrated that that's where those marks could have come from.
Quick point.
Yeah.
8 miles per hour was just to break the tail light. It would not necessarily cause a fracture. And it was a little snarky, but in the government's closing, you heard them thank Arca and Dr. Wolf for what you just showed. You saw the debris field. You saw the impact. It's not a center of mass impact, so it's not static. You get sideswiped with the elbow. It pushes you backwards. The debris field follows you. It followed John O'Keefe. He fell back. He banged his head, and it led to the traumatic brain injury.
The prosecution's expert was just decimated. I mean, it was almost a joke. Put paint on the arm and then have it at 2 miles an hour. It didn't measure all kinds of things like force, the angle of the arm, etc. That was just ripped apart in cross-examination.
I don't think so. And that wasn't a reconstruction. That was just to show the geometry worked. Remember what else Dr. Welcher did? They bought the same Toyota Lexus with the same specs and brought it to Meadows and ruled out backing up into John O'Keefe's car being the cause of smashing that taillight. So look, you've got a smashed out taillight of a vehicle backing up 24 miles per hour at 34 Fairview Road the same time O'Keefe stops moving. I mean, what are we doing here?
You talk about, now we're going to get into a whole new can of worms about the smashed up vehicle, whether that was really consistent with hitting somebody's arm. And the experts there for the defense showed that it was just not consistent. The idea that even at 24 miles an hour, it didn't even break the interior of the lights here. You'd have to do something else to break it up there. And I think that was really, again, decimated by the defense.
All right, our experts are staying with us. Coming up next, how did no one see John O'Keefe at 34 Fairview?
You certainly did not see his body in the snow toward that flagpole?
No.
And you saw no body in the snow, did you?
I didn't look for a body in the snow.
Brutal murders of 4 University of Idaho students.
Oh my God, this doesn't happen here.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Kohlberger.
You could tell there was some off about him.
He was stalking them. He was hunting them.
Forget about motive. We don't even have a connection.
This trial will be on Court TV.
And I pray that we have justice.
The Idaho College Student Murders Trial. Live coverage begins this August, only on Court TV.
John O'Keefe lying helpless like a child on the front yard. She got drunk, she hit him, she left him to die. It's that simple.
This case, another baffling thing, there's so many eyewitnesses that see things and don't see things. Take a listen, because at 34 Fairview that night, there was a party. There were a bunch of young people, we heard from them during the first trial, who were celebrating Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday. They were there, they were coming and going. And then the adults who were at the waterfall, then they show up at the house. So there was a lot of foot traffic and a lot of people going back and forth inside and outside of 34 Fairview. But take a listen.
You certainly did not see his body in the snow toward that flagpole?
No.
And you saw no body in the snow, did you?
I didn't look for a body in the snow.
You could see all the way out to the flagpole?
Yes.
You didn't notice anything unusual at that time when you looked out toward the flagpole walking out of that front door?
I didn't notice anything. I wasn't looking out at the flagpole, but yes.
What was on the ground on the Alberts lawn at that point in the area of the flagpole?
Nothing.
Did you see a 6'1", 216-pound man lying on that lawn?
No.
Okay, so no witness saw John O'Keefe's body, right, until Karen Read saw him the following morning. But nobody saw him in Karen Read's car in front of 34 Fairview. They saw him at an intersection before he got there. Someone saw him, but once they parked in front, no one saw him. No one saw him get out of the car. No one saw him get struck by the car. No one saw him walk into 34 Fairview. Just no one saw him. Which brings us to the next question in our investigation. How did no one see John O'Keefe at 34 Fairview? However you want to interpret that, whether it's on the ground, getting struck, walking inside, walking outside, no one saw him. How is that possible? Let's bring back in our guests still with us. Joseph Krasky Jr., Peter Ellikin here with me in Dedham, John DePietro and Sydney Rushing also joining us. John DePietro, how could no one see him at any point? Not in the car, not outside the car, not on the ground, not in the house.
Well, Vinny, I thought Hank Brennan did a good job to establish there was an eyewitness, and it was Karen Read. She's the one that said she saw him. He got out of the car with the drinking glass. She's the one that said he didn't look mortally wounded. It was Karen Read that said, I didn't hit him. I may have clipped him. It is true. The people in and out of the house, they weren't looking for him. It was a snowstorm. It was dark. But I thought it was very compelling when Hank Brennan said we did have an eyewitness. In her own words, Karen Read places him at 34 Fairview.
And Sydney, this is a question I think that cuts both ways, right? It cuts both ways because if he went to the party inside 34 Fairview, there were people who could have potentially seen him walk inside the house. There also could have been people that saw Karen Read strike him if that happened, right? People could have seen him on the ground if he was on the ground when people were leaving the party. What happened here? How is it that no one saw him?
So that's a great question, right, Vinny? I'm sure the jury's asking the same exact question. What happened here? There's not enough here to make a definitive answer as to what did happen. Because you have Jen McCabe saying that I was looking out the window, I kept checking, I thought I saw Karen's SUV out there. And it's like, okay, so if you saw Karen's SUV out there, why weren't you calling them afterwards? Like, hey, where are you guys? Are you coming in? Like, or checking out there and looking out front again. You have multiple people leaving the party after this happened saying they didn't see anything. And then we have Lucky saying, I drove by this. I would have noticed that and I didn't see that. So you have a bunch of witnesses, no one seeing this. No one saw this happen. And as to the statements that Karen Read said, I think that they're being taken out of context and what was said. When she said he didn't look mortally wounded, she was talking about when she got there that morning, not that night. So, there's a lot of things you got to take into consideration here.
All right, let's go to our guests that we have here live in Dedham. Peter Ellikin, this is one that I can't reconcile, like why no one would see him. Like, no one saw him. I would have expected someone to see him get out of the car. Someone, if he walked in the house, someone see him walk in the house. If he was in the house, someone would see him in the house. If he's out of the car and gets struck, I would expect someone to see him on the ground. How does the jury reconcile this fact that all these people are at 34 Fairview? I mean, more people than testified at the trial this time. No one saw him.
Well, there you go with reasonable doubt then. And it just strains credibility that there he is lying on the ground, supposedly, and a dozen people walk. And it's a small lawn. Remember, this is not a big estate here. It's a small lawn, and nobody sees him. It's, and everybody's got a reason. While I was wanting to make sure it wasn't slippery, so I was looking at my shoes or looking for my car. Maybe if one person walked out and didn't look, I could buy that. But a dozen people and nobody sees him, right? Relatively close to the front door. And then you have one of the best witnesses in the whole trial, Lucky Loughran, the plow driver. And he's got what he calls his Franken truck because it's got such bright lights. And he says he's looking at the Albert house because he knows the Alberts. And he even sees at some point when he drives by, he's driven by a few times, doesn't see a body. And then when he sees this Ford Edge car there, he says, right in front of their house, and he says, I could have called them in because you're not supposed to park on the street in the snow, but I didn't, kind of because he knows the people. So, that's a very good independent witness also. So I just think with that's just question after question after question you would ask if I was the jury. And I would say, did the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that I just don't think it rises to that level.
How?
You just can't make this stuff up, right? Lucky Loughran, that's who they're hanging their hats on to dispel the notion that John O'Keefe was out in the front yard. The DPW worker that's colorblind, that didn't see the red dumpster on the street, that literally was mowing down basketball hoops with his plow that night. Look, you've got to trust the data. The data was not undermined. The data was not disproven.
I get
20 seconds in the GPS
I'm sure we'll
points.
have a question about the data.
But the
Why
data
didn't
puts
any...
him at the flagpole. But let me finish.
He's deflecting. That's a side issue.
No. He moves for 20 seconds, 34 steps, and the GPS, 99% of the bullet points were right at the flagpole. Look, if you're coming out, there was a video of Higgins at the Canton police station, and that closely mirrored, because it was so close in time, the conditions. It was snowing heavily. It was dark. The area where John O'Keefe was found in the morning was set back and away from the house. It was in an unlit area. And remember what Karen Reed said when she saw him? He looked like a buffalo on the prairie, not to disparage the dead. Remember Julie Nagel said it looked more like a blob? It didn't look like John O'Keefe or like a human body
that was hours and hours later when there was a ton of snow there. When the people left that party, there was probably like an inch of snow.
No, Julie Nagel was within an hour, and she said trial one. It looked. She saw something that looked like a blob. Didn't even dawn on her that it was a body. And also remember
Why did they bring
the
her to
light,
trial
the dome
too?
light. The dome light being on in the car. That's when John O'Keefe got out of the car. And the Nagels passed to the left of Karen Reed's SUV. It would be natural not to see him.
Not to see him on the other side of the SUV?
Also, the defense promised 2 witnesses that would unequivocally establish that John O'Keefe went in the house. So maybe we're asking the wrong question. Where is the evidence that puts him in the house? And if he never went in the house, then clearly he was in the yard, in the same place, and it's not a coincidence, where the debris field was, where his hat was, where the glass was, where the straw was, where the sneaker was.
Where's the evidence that he went into the house? The chief investigator of the whole thing refused to go into the house. A body is found right by the front door, practically, of a house, and he doesn't even, knowing that he was going to a party there that night, allegedly, and the investigator doesn't even say, gee, I think I'll go look to see if there's signs of a struggle or blood or anything like that. It was so poorly mismanaged by the police that, and then you turn around and say, well, how come there's no evidence that he was in the house? Of course there's not. The police did not do the job that any normal police officer would do if you weren't friends with loads of people in that house.
Well, I don't know.
Maybe.
Hold that thought.
You got it.
We got more to get to. A lot more to get to. When we come back, what do the taillight images show us? I'm Vinnie Politan, and we are live in Dedham, Massachusetts. That is the courthouse where Karen Reed is on trial for the murder of John O'Keefe, her boyfriend, and that is the subject of our investigation. We take a look at the retrial of the century. The jury has deliberated just over a day, 9 hours. They'll be back to work tomorrow. In the meantime, for those of you not familiar with the story and some of the important evidence that this jury is talking about, take a look.
The death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe on a snowy January night in Canton ignited a firestorm of controversy, much of it centered around a cracked taillight. Prosecutors allege that Karen Reed, O'Keefe's girlfriend, struck him with her SUV and left him to die in the front yard of 34 Fairview Road. They point to the broken tail light as crucial evidence, claiming it matches injuries on O'Keefe's body and glass fragments found at the scene. But Reed's defense argues the tail light was broken after the fact, during towing or by investigators themselves, and that she is being framed to protect others. Supporters of Reed have rallied behind her, insisting the taillight is a red herring in a broader cover-up. With dueling experts, impassioned crowds, and mounting suspicion on both sides, the broken taillight has become more than just a piece of shattered plastic. It's a symbol of a case cracking open at the seams.
The tale of the taillight, such a big part of this story, such a big part of this trial. and clearly will be a big part of deliberations for this jury as they try to figure out what happened and deliver a verdict in this case, something the first jury was unable to do. And that's why we're here at the retrial. Now, there was a lot of testimony about the taillight. Both sides agree the taillight was broken, but it's really a matter of how broken was it. The defense says it was partially broken, whereas the prosecution is saying it's more fully broken on the side of Karen Read's SUV. Let's take a listen to some of that testimony.
The red plastic from the debris from the clothing from 7-18.18 was found to be consistent in color, microscopic appearance, and instrumental properties with the portions that I sampled from the red plastic from the taillight.
Was the damage you saw when you looked at the car for the first time in the Sallyport area any different than the damage that appears on this Exhibit 13?
It is not.
Is this the condition of the right rear taillight when you showed up at the Read household at around 3:15 in the afternoon on January 29th, 2022?
Absolutely not. That middle section was intact when I was there. Towards that right side where that large chunk is, that's what was missing. So this area was intact. This is what I saw was missing here.
The testimony, right? There's testimony, eyewitness testimony about what people remember seeing in that taillight, but there are also images. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. What do the taillight images show us? What will they show the jury? What will they prove in this case? Still with us to help answer that question. Joseph Krowski Jr. and Peter Ellikin live with me here in Dedham, Massachusetts, and John DePietro along with Sydney Rushing. We've been talking about this since the beginning, gentlemen. The taillight, the images, the jury looking at those images. How much time do you think they spend looking at them? And what do you see when you look at those images?
So there's 200 plus exhibits. We have 32 days of testimony. They probably spent the better part of these first 9 hours going through the exhibits. And of course, one of the focal points will be the taillight evidence. Talked a little bit about it in the last segment. One of the biggest stories of this retrial is the Judd Welcher test, where he affirmatively disproved that damage to that taillight could have taken place from Karen Read backing in to John O'Keefe's Traverse at 1 Meadows. If you believe that it didn't occur there, then essentially the case is over, because we've got John O'Keefe lying in a debris field of her taillight. Her taillight is found in his clothing. It is matched up. You had Sergeant Barrows, who wanted his 15 minutes of fame, so he drove up here from Dighton to testified differently than he did in the first trial, and he said, no, that's not how it looked at all. But then he was presented at the trial with the two pictures. One, the video from 5 a.m. or 5:07 a.m. from Meadows when Karen's leaving. You can clearly see missing taillight. But even the better picture, the well-being check from the Canton Police Department at, I think it was 8:05 or 8:13 a.m. at Meadows.
8:23, I think.
8:23, you're right. You're paying attention. 8:23 in the morning. You can clearly see that at least, and it varies, look, this is not precise, but at least 15 to 20% of that right side taillight is missing, and it's packed with snow. Conversely, the left side is completely intact. So when they get back to the Sallyport and they think there's a difference, it's because the snow is now thawed out and melted. But that Judd Welcher test, they couldn't touch that on cross-examination. Him buying the exact same vehicle.
And again, talking about the impact the following morning when Karen Read is backing out at 5:07.
Couldn't have been the cause. And Rentschler, for his part, in trial one, also agreed at the speed she was traveling, that couldn't have been the source of the damage to her rear right taillight. Huge evidence, huge evidence. And if the jury's focusing on that, they've got a problem.
How about the images? Like, how much time do you think the jury spends looking at the pictures, saying, listen, we've got pictures of the taillight, we'll try to figure it out ourselves?
I think that the images really have to be taken in context with the whole story, because there was no image that absolutely settled it for once and for all. But, you know, as Joe just said, there was some expert from the prosecution who said, absolutely, you know, it's from the impact. And then you had expert after expert from defense saying the opposite. So this is a classic lesson for everybody in what reasonable doubt is. And there is a ton of information that can raise questions about this. I mean, we know that she definitely hit her car not at the, you know, at his home at another time. And then we have the police officer who doesn't, from Dighton, who doesn't have a dog in this fight, who basically was consistent in what he said. The damage was not that way until the police took custody of it later. And the key point also is that, keep in mind that we talk about the debris field in front of the house at Fairview. They did search after search in the morning, even got a leaf blower, found nothing, and then only after the police, you know, took custody of the car hours and hours later, suddenly it's all over the place. There's 46 pieces, and you can see it from the road. It is laughable. It is a joke, and at least it would raise reasonable doubt. This is not, as Joe says, absolutely cut and dried and settled, and the prosecution proved this beyond a reasonable doubt.
No expert for the defense said that damage could have come at One Meadow, so that's just not accurate, and that didn't come out at the trial. The other part of it is...
And this is what I want to ask. You think that the experts are going to trump the images themselves?
I think they both work in favor of the Commonwealth.
Okay, so you believe the images do also?
The images absolutely do. You know, instead of, why don't we supplant coincidence upon coincidence with common sense?
Let's get to Sydney. Sydney, what are your thoughts about the images? How much of an impact? What do you see in those images? What do they show?
Images, again, I think that they also have to be taken with the testimony, because what you're asking this jury to say or to understand or to agree to is that John stood there and saw a vehicle coming, if it's where his arm was outstretched, right, with a cup in the perfect position where the Commonwealth says he has to be for this, you know, for the taillight to break how it did and for the injuries to come. You're telling me that he didn't see that car, I think it was 53 feet, it came backwards at 24 miles an hour, and he didn't move? He just put his arm out and thought, like, hey, let me see if I can get her to hit me? So, you know, you've got to take all of that into consideration with this taillight. You have Barrow saying that is not how it looked when he saw it at Dighton. You have Officer Dever, who changed her testimony and said, oh, it was a false memory for, you know, I didn't actually see, you know, the two other officers in there with this vehicle for a wild amount of time, right? Oh, that was a false memory. So I think you have to take the testimony in with the photos. We see the photos, but we have a lot of evidence that doesn't make sense. John's found in a debris field, but the video that was shown of the taillight breaking, the pieces of the taillight fell right next to the car, and John supposedly flew 7 to 10 feet. So make it make sense, because it doesn't make sense to me.
John DePietro, close us out on these images.
Vinny, I think the taillight actually played a larger role in this trial than the first trial. And the reason is you have Alan Jackson saying no collision, no collision, no collision. In the first trial, they got to see Proctor. If they didn't like Proctor, maybe they could say this is the type of guy that could plant something. The jury also saw these endless reconstruction videos where the taillight is smashing. And keep in mind the defense, this time they didn't get him in the house. I actually think the taillight played a large role in this trial. It's also very relatable to the jury. Every member of the jury that has a car, they have a taillight.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's going to be a lot of time spent looking at the images and debating the taillight, because it's one of two things. If that taillight is fully broken, then at the time she's pulling out, then it's game over for Karen Read. Absolutely. But if that taillight's intact, it's game over for prosecution. Still to come, why are Karen Read supporters so passionate?
Coming soon to Court TV.
It's the biggest story that we're covering.
These murders have shaken our community.
He is the boogeyman.
So many eyes have been on Donna Adelson from the beginning. It's terrible. A social media sensation, now a suspected killer.
Why do you have something against me?
She wrote a children's book about her husband's death. Now she's accused of killing him.
The high-stakes trials you don't want to miss. Coming soon, only on Court TV.
As from the first trial, right here in Dedham, you heard the chanting of the Karen Read supporters. Well, you're not hearing the chanting this year. There's different rules, there's different guidelines, and you've got as many people as you had last year. You may actually have some more that have been showing up here for the verdict watch. But I had an opportunity to go around to try to understand the folks who are showing up here, the folks who didn't know Karen Read before any of this, but are so passionately supporting her. Take a look. What do you think the reaction is going to be here in the streets of Dedham if the jury comes back not guilty?
Are you kidding me? It's going to be party in the streets. Yes.
But
yes.
You can't. Shh, but you can't scream now, right? You still have to be.
Oh, please. If Karen comes back and it comes back not guilty, this place is going to be joy. It's going to be wild. It's going to be tears. It's going to be happiness, relief.
If this jury comes back and says guilty,
yeah.
What do you think happens here in the streets of Dedham?
Sad, very sad. Very sad time because we all know she's not guilty. He wasn't hit by a car, and John O'Keefe was not hit by a car. It's very simple. But if they do come back guilty, we'll all be very saddened, and there'll be a lot of, I don't know, what else can I say?
Why do you think so many show up? Like so many. I've never seen this. The closest to we would get to this. Ted, is this probably close to Michael Jackson, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, this is, and that was the world's most famous celebrity. This is Karen Read. Nobody knew her before this. Why so many people?
I think people are just convicted in what they believe. Whether you feel for the family, which I do, but I don't believe she did it. And people are strong about that. They don't want it to happen to me or you or anybody.
And it's palpable and it's real. They are invested in this case. It happens rarely in these big trials that the public, there's such an outpouring. Usually it's, there's a child has been murdered and there's, people want to make sure that someone's held accountable for that. Rarely is it ever for someone who's been accused of murdering a Boston police officer. So that brings us to the final question in our investigation tonight, which is, why are Karen Read supporters so passionate? Still with us, Joseph Krowski Jr., Peter Ellikin, live with me here in Dedham, and John DePietro and Sydney Rushing joining us. John, I'll begin with you. What are your thoughts about why Karen Read supporters are so passionate?
Vinnie, I have been in that courthouse since jury selection started April 2nd, and I've given up on trying to reason. They didn't follow Hank Brennan. I thought he made a very compelling closing argument. So much of this, I think, is, number one, the trial is televised, so that adds to the interest. Number two, social media certainly plays a role. But number three, it's how they learn about it. And they're learning about it. There's great distrust in our mainstream media these days. And so they learn about it in different places. And when they learn about it, that's the path they go down. And I will say this, you cannot shake them out of it. Right now, the Red Sox Patriots could use fans like this, because no matter what is said, they stay blindly on the path. I think it's also, it's a woman. It's not a gun or a knife. It's a car. She's a suburban, seemingly attractive, professional. I think all of these things collide, and then you get people that just want to be part of something.
Sydney, what are your thoughts?
I don't think it's about being part of something. I think that the majority of people who see this case view that as that could be them. I do a good amount of appointed work as part of my career, and I can't imagine somebody who's going up against a government like this that's going, taking things, text messages that, we're going to pin it all on the girl, and things like that, and, can't hire the experts that Karen was able to do, hire the attorneys that she was able to hire. Can you imagine That is why so many people are invested in this. One, because they could see it as themselves. And two, I think it just goes to show that sometimes we don't have officers that are always putting their best foot forward. And sometimes we see them do things like this. I think now that things are televised like this, we could see how cover-ups could happen. I'm not saying a cover-up is what happened here, but we see how it could be a thing. And that's why they're there. They're there supporting her.
Let me ask you, Joe, why do you think the Karen Read supporters are so passionate? Because you've seen it.
People do want to be a part of something. Look, there's been a diachronic shift in the way we ingest trials now, isn't there? People are actually not just watching and listening, they're participating. They're doing their own YouTube channels. They're doing their own X channels. They're commenting. They're becoming part of the story. And unlike trials past, this is 24/7 coverage, and it's all dominated by the defense, right? Because there are constraints and limitations on what the district attorney can say. They're essentially operating under a gag order. Mike Morrissey made one comment, and he was lambasted for it. So I do think they want to be part of it. I think that they don't really, and look, I'm not insulting people. Some people don't even care about the merits anymore. Pin it on the girl, that went the same way as the 227 search. It never happened. I don't know what the verdict is going to be, but if it's guilty, there might be a mass of 300 women in hot pink chasing Hank Brennan down Main Street, and I'd love to see that.
I disagree with John and Joe's premise that people are just kind of a hysteria. They want to be part of something, and they're blindly kind of following this crowd. I think the questioning that the public is doing is really on the merits here. So often we see murder trials, and we all know the person's guilty. Marathon bomber, we saw videos, they had the evidence, everybody hated its guts, everybody thought he was guilty, no controversy there. But from the beginning, we saw such police misconduct and bias in this case, and there was enough evidence on the other side questioning the evidence of the prosecution that I really think this is one time that it's just honestly because of the merits, that there's an awful lot of exculpatory evidence here as opposed to evidence that, against her. But we rarely see that. Usually so many of these murder cases seem to be very cut and dried where, yeah, we all know he's guilty. And if you see a crowd of people around a courthouse, it's because they want to, hang the person. They want to see justice done. And this is so rare that you almost see this person being celebrated or applauded just because, as Sidney said, this could be any of us.
But at the end of the day, it's still a hit-and-run drunk driving case, so there's really no explanation for how it's grown so big since trial one. You can feel it actually expanding today.
Except there was no hit and run aside from that. And there's a lot of evidence that it wasn't hit and run. And that's why I think the big debate goes on here and people are so passionate, because if it was just a nail down, lie down, we've got it.
Do you think we'll see more of this in the high profile cases, the way a story like this can take over, and perhaps see a repeat with some defendant in a high profile case getting the support that Karen Read got? It's become an economic engine for a lot of people. I think people have always been fascinated by it, but now with streaming and you can watch trials real time, and look, it's real life and it's fascinating. Even though there's a lot at stake for the O'Keefes and certainly for Karen Read, so I don't discount that, but this is better than any fictional story you can watch on, Netflix or Amazon. It's a real life trial unfolding right before your eyes. Court TV's been around a long time, but I think it's the combination of Court TV and social media. And then you have a story that resonates and people that resonate, and now you've got some skepticism about people in power, etc. People not trusting, they call us the mainstream media. We don't trust you. We want to get our information where we want to get it. And everyone's doing it and everyone's investigating a case. I think it's great. I think it's more people paying attention to our system of justice, and that's fantastic. Also fantastic, our guests, Joseph Krowski Jr., of course, Peter Ellikin, John DePietro, and Sidney Rushing. Thank you all so much. Great to have you on, and we'll see you again really, really soon. All right, folks, that's it for tonight. I will be here until the verdict happens. Not right in this chair. I'm going to go back to the hotel, but I'll be back here tomorrow during the day. Thank you for watching. We will continue seeking out answers as the investigation continues.